Hello, everybody. Welcome to Discovery, hosted by Efficiency Canada. Discovery is a session that we host every 2 weeks, and it's really meant to bring the people in the sector together and to highlight some of the things we're learning, some of the different research we're hearing, and just build capacity together as an energy efficiency sector. So my name is Alison Mostowich. I'm the Director of Engagement at Efficiency Canada. Efficiency Canada operates within Carleton University, and we acknowledge that the location of our campus sits on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. I myself am in Calgary, which is Mohkinstsis in Blackfoot, which means the gathering of two rivers. So in Calgary, we have the Bow River and the Elbow River, which is a very important meeting space for the different Indigenous communities in our area. So I also wanted to wish everybody today a very happy International Women's Day. Today, we're recognizing the accomplishments and the contributions of the amazing women in our community. And I would encourage you to do so in your communities as well. Reach out, send an email, share with the women in your lives who have inspired you or helped your journey, how important they are and how much you appreciate them. So with that, I will introduce our speakers today. We've got a bit of a different session. We're going to do a bit of an interview style. So we have with us Natasha Daniel, who is with Efficiency Canada, and Afaf Azzouz, who I will not introduce. I'll let Natasha do it. But we are so pleased to have you both with us today. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much for having us, Alison. We are so pumped to kick off International Women's Day today at Efficiency Canada. Welcome, I'm Natasha Daniel, and I am the Manager of Workforce Development at Efficiency Canada. Thank you so much for joining us today to celebrate International Women's Day. I'm facilitating today from Toronto, also known as Toronto. The word actually originates from a Mohawk word, Toronto, which means a place in the water where the trees are standing tall. It's said to refer to the wooden stakes that were used as fishing weirs in the narrows of the local river systems by the Haudenosaunee and the Huron-Wendat peoples. So many of the streets that we walk on today, prominent streets in Toronto, they were actually original portage routes used by Indigenous people from thousands of years ago, right? And that's the way that I think through my work in energy and energy efficiency. It's recognizing all of the work that has taken place for us to be here today, especially recognizing Women's History Month. Our work on this land is built upon the knowledge and sustainable practices of Indigenous matriarchs and mothers, aunties, sisters, daughters, granddaughters, nieces, and cousins across Turtle Island. These incredible women are inspirational leaders and role models for all of us as we move forward on our individual and collective decarbonization journeys, but overall our personal journeys. Today, we're taking a little bit more of an intimate and interactive approach to Discovery EE with launching Afaf's Day in the Life campaign. So for those of you who don't know what Day in the Life is, it features real people in real energy efficient work environments. It showcases a range of professionals from engineers, architects, retrofitters, tradespeople, building science academics, and basically everyone that it takes to make our building sector or the built environment net zero. So we're going to be releasing Afaf's amazing video early next week. You're going to want to really stay tuned to our socials, our Instagram, our LinkedIn, because we're sticking to our theme of Women's History Month. And we're showing both a personal and professional side of the sector you've never seen. It's exciting, and it's a timely tool to attract new and mid-career professionals, particularly women, to energy efficiency. So stay tuned for that early next week. Okay. So now let's get into what we've all been waiting for. Meet Afaf Azzouz. Her career journey to becoming a sustainability and climate manager spans continents and communities. Designing net zero, high-performance buildings in Africa, Europe, and North America, Afaf has been involved in the design, implementation, and performance measurement of hundreds of buildings and multiple infrastructure projects. Her experience stretches across climates, from a co-founder of Carm Solar, a startup offering net zero energy buildings in off-grid desert communities in Egypt, to joining Stantec Winnipeg as the building performance engineer on Indigenous community projects, energy code compliance, and projects in extreme cold climates. Starting her career at Stantec, Afaf led the carbon impact and building performance modeling teams in both Quebec and Ontario. She then quickly progressed, achieving the title of Associate and Senior Building Performance Engineer, all before, get this, the age of 30. Presently, Afaf works as a senior sustainability and climate manager for Deloitte Canada, leading their net zero implementation with some of Canada's most high-profile corporations. Afaf, it is an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. It's like we have all the applause, the digital applause that's happening. I can hear it and feel it right now. How are you doing?
I'm awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's a
It's
pleasure.
great. No, it's gonna be a great chat. Number one, because your experience just speaks volumes. I think you've had so many amazing roles and perspectives in this sector. So we're gonna get right into it. If someone gave you a magic green wand, what would you wish for when it comes to advancing climate sustainability as well as net zero in the built environment?
Perfect. So once again, I just wanted to backtrack a little bit and say thank you for giving me a voice today. It's an honor to be here, and happy International Women's Day. Your question about magic wands is so relevant to this day because, first off, even if we forget about historical events, we can still feel their impact on our lives today. Whether it's about women having the right to vote or choosing what they can do with their bodies, or for those living under occupation, I would like to believe that the world is still moving forward, not backwards. And when I was reading up on the history of International Women's Day, you could see how it was linked to the women's suffrage movement and how that directly correlated to not just women, but many underrepresented groups. So in fact, women's right to vote did not come all at the same time. Initially, women gained voting rights based on ties to armed forces and property ownership in the 1960s, but that excluded women of color and wealth, and they only got their rights in the 1940s. And even under the Indian Act, Indigenous women couldn't vote federally until 1960. So while I reflect on my career as a woman and a mother on this day, I honestly couldn't help but think of those still suffering to do the most basic things in life in many war zones and occupied territories like Congo, Sudan, and Palestine, as basic as feeding their babies. And particularly in Gaza, where according to the UN and numerous organizations, women and children are still suffering from some of the worst atrocities per capita in modern history. So for me, this day, it's not just about women. It's actually about the long journey towards a just society for all. So going back to your question about the green magic wand and sustainability and climate in the built environment, I would wish that the energy transition towards net zero and renewables is highly driven by a just transition. In order for us to get to where we need to be in the built environment, we will need to have access to a lot of critical minerals and a lot of renewable energy. And so by that, I mean that I would wish that the access to critical minerals and clean energy does not become the foundation for wars or the loss of biodiversity. Instead, I wish it becomes a foundation for collaboration, resource sharing, and collective demand reduction. So since I have done very little to lighten the mood in the beginning of my talk, because I swear it can be funny sometimes, I would end by saying there's incredible hope and progress in the space. And it's the people in the audience today that can make these magical wishes come to life. So thanks.
Wow. Absolutely. And a magical wish only stays a magical wish if we don't create a plan of action. And it seems like when we speak about sustainability, Afaf, something that I just want to highlight about what you said is that it does not exist in its own bubble. That if we are fighting for sustainability in our climate, then it's the same strength that we need in order to fight against injustice of women, against the injustice of war, against the injustice of occupation. That all of these things, that climate and war and the destruction of our world and our planet and our soil and the food we eat, and the mothers that cook it, and the mothers who don't have access to feeding their babies, that this is a whole circle here that we are a part of, that we're all building here. And it's so important to keep that perspective in our work so that we don't just keep these blinders on in our one role and what we're supposed to do, but that we connect it to all of these things. And that's what we're supposed to do, right? That's why we're in the digital world. That's what we're supposed to be doing with all of this. And so you kicked it off so beautifully. Thank you so much for that. I feel like when you ask Miss Canada or Miss America, what would you do? And they're like, world peace. I'm like, Afaf, that's the answer that they need to say next time to win.
It felt like that while I was writing it up, but it's really sincere.
No, absolutely. And you could feel it. And you could absolutely feel that. Afaf, I can't try to articulate this any other way than saying that your career, just knowing you as a person and a mother this past year, is incredibly motivational. just all of it together. And I'm so glad that you decided to be a part of our Energy Trailblazers program. After you graduated from the American University in Cairo, because you started off in Egypt and you received a BSc there in architecture and construction, you took a very different career path after graduating than the rest of your peers. What motivated you to start working at Carm Solar and in off-grid Egyptian communities?
Perfect. So yeah, I think it's funny because a lot of people graduating from architectural engineering, once they graduate, they realize they're not paid enough. So a lot of them, switch careers right at the forefront of graduating. But I felt like I needed to do something different while still staying true to what I chose to study, because it's completely fine to shift careers. But at that stage, I was very passionate about what it is that I was doing, and I wanted to stay true to it. The problem in Egypt, there's not that much architecture. It's very densely populated. So a lot of the times it's either like a mini retrofit or it's very much driven by an interior design, which doesn't touch base on energy efficiency yet. And if there is any architecture, it will probably be geared towards building like new suburban areas, so helping with urban sprawl. And sometimes it's also in gated communities in Egypt. So I just luckily stumbled upon the startup Carm Solar / Carm Build. That was at the time under 20 people. And by the time I had left it 2 years after, it was over 100 people. And now it's one of the most successful startups, no longer a startup in Egypt. But having said that, I wanted to do something different. So I interned with them for 6 months, unpaid. And my parents were like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? You're not even being recognized. But I was so adamant to continue because I saw their vision. So basically we would help build earth constructed net zero energy buildings that are 100% functioning on renewable energy in some of the remote areas that are highly dependent on diesel. And so there was a time where diesel generation was starting to become not as abundant. The transportation was an issue in the desert. So the autonomy piece came into play. Plus it was very hot sometimes and also very cold at times. So you do need the renewable energy. But then the way we had to design them was in the sense that you had to cater to this very harsh environment. So maybe I'll end here. And like I said, by the time I had left, I was very lucky to see the company grow, and they had acknowledged me as a co-founder for the startup.
You don't hear that often, going from intern to co-founder. Can you tell us a little bit about that, the benefits of starting? I think a lot of people do their engineering degree or they're finished with their law degree and they want to go to the top firm. And that might not be the route for everyone. And why is being able to go from an intern to a co-founder? What were some of the benefits that you had at Carm Solar, at a smaller and a more adventurous first career option?
I made some lifetime friends there. I made some lifetime colleagues. I also traveled in areas in Egypt that I've never seen before, other than like a tiny Egyptian tourist. I talked to local people. I saw the impact of our work. We actually worked a lot. A lot of the people who were integrating solar panels or building the workers' villages were people from there. So we worked with local communities, and so we did see that benefit. But also I managed to see a lot more. So because you're in a startup and there's not that many people, you get higher responsibility, obviously. So you get to see the ins and outs of talking to the CEO, and the CEO comes in the morning and says, "What's up?" And so it was very holistic in terms of the design process. So I was very lucky and fortunate to be a part of.
Exactly. And I think that it's also a great example that you can have an illustrious career and take a risk. And in fact, maybe sometimes more of our students who are graduating should take those risks, right, at the beginning of their career to help them figure out where they want to go next. And like you said, to get such a variety of skill sets in that job. So I think that's a great point to highlight. You went back. So you finished with your BSc, and then you also went back to graduate school after you were working at Carm Solar. And I know throughout some of our conversations, Afaf, you really emphasized the point of not going to school for school's sake or not taking on more programs just for the sake of increasing your training on your resume, that it should be done strategically throughout your career. So why was it important for you to go back and get your master's in environmental design and engineering?
So I think at Carm Solar, I worked there for 2 years. And while we were building amazing projects, we weren't able to model exactly the impact of the energy consumption in the space. We weren't able to really assess how big does the window need to be to make sure that throughout the year there's like the number of comfortable hours in a year will be XYZ. What are the thermal properties of the stone that we're using? How cold is it gonna let the space be in the hottest day of the year? So a lot of these like really important metrics I lacked. And I was very fiddly, I guess, like if that's a word, but I really wanted to quantify the impact of my work. So I applied to the University College London in Bartlett, and I pursued the Masters of, like you said, Environmental Design and Engineering, which was a highly practical type of master's. It combined people who wanted to go into academia for all their life, but it also combined people who were doing this part-time while working. It was this like interdisciplinary mix of like mechanical engineers, construction, like structural and architects, all with the aim of becoming what in Canada we actually call building engineers or building performance engineers, because it's like a new discipline that is quite interdisciplinary in its nature. So yeah, for 12 months I did that. And even in my thesis, I tried to be as practical as possible. So I worked with WSP to do a life cycle assessment for an office building for a client. And eventually we published a journal paper out of it.
Amazing. And how do you feel that, what did you feel that gave you then coming into, because it was quickly after that you then went on to Stantec. So you went from Egypt to London, and then you started your Canadian career, you could say, at Stantec. What did you feel that, like, what was the confidence that you now had after that, being able to quantify these measurements that you could now go into Stantec Winnipeg in a completely opposite environment than the desert, which is like extreme cold? I have so many questions about that, but we'll start there.
So first of all, I got my job at a party in Winnipeg. So just so you guys know, like it wasn't a party hard kind of party, but it was a nice kind of architectural party. So there was opportunity for networking. So I highly recommend people do that more often. But I was lucky enough she was just like, hey, what are you up to? I was like, yeah, I'm Egyptian. You know, I just came to be with my partner and live in Canada. And this is what I do. And she was like, oh my God, this is exactly what we need. And I was like, what are the chances? And so I got very lucky to be introduced to someone even more senior, and they gave me a chance. They just talked to me. And so I was hired on in Winnipeg as a buildings energy specialist. And by that time, energy modeling was becoming bigger and bigger in Canada, and the energy code compliance and the incentives around energy code were becoming even more interesting. So the niche skill of energy modeling and being able to quantify was highly in demand, thankfully, and it didn't quite matter where you come from, right? And even though, yes, I didn't have all the experience of very harsh, extreme cold climate, I had already been exposed to the other side, plus the London, UK type of weather. So it was not easy. It was not hard to step up and learn from the mechanical engineers, talk to the structural engineers, how they like to build, what envelope properties they like to abide by when it comes to the architects as well.
Did you find that your graduate degree was an equalizer for you in understanding buildings in North America?
100%, because like when I moved to Canada, I had two options. I wasn't going to be able to get the certification of an architect. I had to have a master's from Canada to become an architect in Canada. But at the same time, it was surprisingly easier to go through the engineering route. And thankfully, it was also the route that I wanted to take. Whereas I was sitting as a sustainable engineer back in Egypt and more on the architecture side, I was then placed under the mechanical engineering department when I joined Antec. So again, this interdisciplinary piece was very helpful. And like I said, like geoscientists Manitoba didn't classify me as an architectural engineer or a mechanical engineer. They classified me as a buildings engineer because they didn't know better what to do with me. So
that's so funny that it was too hard to become an architect. So I became an engineer when I got here. I think that's awesome. And I think it also just shows how impressive your career has been, right? Afaf, I wanted to also ask you, like, that interdisciplinary approach to your work, it kept you flexible. So no matter what part of the world you landed up in, you were able, from that energy modeling standpoint, situate it where you needed to. You could contextualize it from that place, which I think is awesome. And I think looking at it from a careers perspective, or myself working in workforce, I think we can do a better job at helping amplify those points for newcomers who are coming in, who have done high performance in other countries. Maybe they're not familiar from a North American vantage point, but certainly there are those interdisciplinary points that can help them enter the sector or understand what further training or questions they need to ask, right, to get there. It's not that if you worked in Egypt that your experience is not valid in North America. Not at all. It is very much. But like you said, the standards and the codes and the way you structure the envelope or things like that, those will differ upon climate, as you suggested.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more. Oh,
sorry,
no,
I was gonna say one thing to that. It's like a lot of people warned me that I didn't have the Canadian experience, and I'm sure a lot of people heard that word before. But like I said, thankfully, there's a lot of other routes, like just begging for an internship or starting to talk to people within your network or attending different types of settings like that can actually get you exposed to smaller things you can do before you can enter the job market, which is totally fine.
Absolutely. And one of our trailblazers, Will, has also spoken about that in his own career journey of coming and starting to just literally knock on doors and ask people for jobs within construction, to him now eventually having his own business and doing amazing things across North America. So yeah, I think Afaf, that's great advice. Parties, talking to people, asking questions, and sometimes, yes, having to do a nice ask/beg. Talk to us a little bit more about your time in Winnipeg, because you've worked a lot in off-grid communities in Egypt, and now you're also working with Indigenous community projects. What can you tell us in terms of, there are so many people that are in our sector, I think, that work on behalf of equity-seeking communities, but are not actually connected to those communities in which they are building. But Afaf, it seems like that has not been your case. And can you speak a little bit to that, what you were doing in Winnipeg and how those connections with community has helped you build?
So I'll say two things. Like first thing, not so much on the community side, it was more on the technical expertise and how that really helped me. I sat somewhere in the middle of like amazing mechanical engineers, very knowledgeable architects, and people who've been doing this for a long, long time. Here I am, this young engineering intern, telling them that they can't design things the way they're used to. So they're like, prove it. Or telling them, hey, your client can get more money if they become 20% better than the energy code. And they're like, ooh, interesting. How? Let's do this. Or the Manitoba Hydro has these incentives surrounding that. So there was a bit of a push and pull, but at the same time, it was very humbling because they would start listening to you and you didn't have all the answers. Be like, how would you do that differently? And why would you do that? And be like, it's cost related, or it's technically we can't do that. And it doesn't make sense to put this HVAC system in. Or, and I was like, did you know that the code now requires a 50% minimum energy recovery wheel, etc. So in terms of technical expertise, I think I learned so much in Winnipeg just by doing code compliance first. And that, I think, grounded me to growing in my career one step at a time, because now where I'm at today, I think I am very proud of my technical expertise first. And then I'm able to offer, quote unquote, more strategic expertise as a consequence of my technical expertise. So that was one thing. On the side of the communities, because, you know, Winnipeg has a very large Indigenous community, and also within Winnipeg, we did a lot more new construction jobs, and a lot of them were schools. So it happened to be that some of them obviously were within Winnipeg, some of them were in more remote communities. And we did 4 First Nations schools in northern Manitoba, where you couldn't even access the communities other than by plane, or sometimes you would ship the materials over the winter roads when everything was super cold. So the choice of the materials didn't have to be super heavy, we had to think about prefabrication, we had to think about mold, and we had to think about thermal properties that we never had to think about. And a lot of it had to start with stakeholder engagement with the communities itself, because we couldn't go in and be like, hey, this is what you want, and these are the patterns we're going to use and so it was very collaborative in terms of approach.
Thank you for that. That's awesome. Oh, Lori says, hoping for more money is the way to make change. Yeah, one of them, definitely. Getting that money is even better than hoping for it. Okay, so keep your questions and comments coming as well. And if you have, this is interactive, so if there's anything that pops up in the chat in real time that you want to get to, just let me know, because I have the chat open as well. Okay, So after you worked at Winnipeg, you then quickly progressed, achieving the title of Associate and Senior Building Performance Engineer. So you went from just meeting somebody at a party to getting the job in Winnipeg to now moving on to Stantec, Ontario, and Quebec, leading teams there. And you did this all before the age of 30. You were at the top of your career. Can you tell us a little bit about how did that happen? How did you go from the person that was saying, hey, I think we should do this, I think you should do that, to now leading teams, right?
So in Ottawa, every time we moved, and we moved because my partner had specific, less restrictions, quote unquote, when it comes to his job. So we moved, and I would complain and be like, hey, we just established ourselves here. Why do we have to move? And then surprisingly, my career thrived, as a consequence. And I think as a person as well, I love diversity. I love change. So my career has also happily thrived, because in Ottawa it was much more, it gave me a whole new perspective on not just new construction. Now we were retrofitting existing buildings, and we were doing these super duper detailed studies on mega projects, mega federal projects in Ottawa and the Gatineau area. And all of a sudden we had to go inside those buildings, understand how they're working and how they're not working and why they're not working, and calibrating the energy models up to the hourly resolution, because then we take the baseline energy model as a digital twin and then produce pathways towards decarbonization, if you will. And not only did the government say you can decarbonize for however money that you want, but you definitely need to show us a business case. So they had this amazing methodology, one of which was called the minimum performance cost neutral option, a carbon neutral option, and then what they called the best value for Canada, because it then combined the climate aspect and the financial economical aspect to it. I grew up so much professionally there by virtue of honestly having two amazing men who were other colleagues in my life that up until now, like Phil, Giuliano, if you're listening, you were amazing. So they taught me so much. And then there was a bit of saying that people didn't care how old or young you were, and they just listened to you if you had something to say. So thankfully that happened, and we were joined by an amazing round of people who are junior and intermediate folks that managed to actually make us all thrive as a consequence. Having said that, though, there is an upside to getting promoted. In between my promotion and leaving the teams and everything, I had given birth to my first child 5 years ago. So while that was a very amazing experience, and a lot of it, quote unquote, went smooth, if you will, I only realized maybe after 2-3 years how burnt out I was, how unable I was able to manage work life and mom life and wife life and house life and friends life, right? And I think I got the promotion because I went too fast. And I think that needs to be said. And one of my amazing mentors, again, Yole, if you're listening, she said, Afaf, you can have everything you want, but you can have it at different times of your life. And I just didn't listen, honestly. I hit the ground running because I was so adamant to talk to adults after my maternity leave. And once I did, I got the promotion and I was very happy, but then I burnt out. And so I think that just goes without saying it. You can have everything, but you just need to pace yourself and enjoy the moments that matter too, because sometimes they don't all, you only have a limited time to enjoy specific aspects of your life. So
Afaf, I think that's so important that you bring up. We don't talk about it enough. And I think especially when we hear the narratives of quote unquote successful career-driven women, because we're sold constantly this idea that you can do it all and you can do it all at the same time. So in a way, Afaf, you were the pinnacle of success. You were a mom, you were a wife, you had all the things that our society, and you got a promotion all at the same time, right? And so the pressure was immense for you. But I think for those of us who actually are mothers as well, we understand that it's just a picture. It's just a snapshot. It's not the reality, right? The idea that we can do it all, I think the question becomes, why? Why would anybody want to juggle 500 balls at one time? It's not that I can't juggle various balls at various times of the day, but to take on this idea that we can do it all already seems like a stressful arena to enter into. And I think that you are really speaking to that point. We have so many questions, and I just want to let everybody know we're totally going to get there. But I wanted to ask you something as well, Afaf, about that time off. The time off that you had from mat leave and coming back, your personal life, but your career. So there was some kind of breaking point that happened. And I think all of us who've had any kind of breaking point knows that at the end of it, there's some kind of light, and it usually leads you in that new direction. So can you speak a little bit about, like you said, like reaching that very hard idea that I don't want to do it like this anymore, and what happened for you?
Yeah, I never thought I'd quit. And I never thought I'd quit a little bit because I was burnt out. Because when you burn out, you also lose passion for what you do. And when you have an amazing family of colleagues and amazing leadership left and right, like it's very hard to make that decision, but it's very internal and you can't keep going. And so I started looking at what else can I do so I can pump up my passion a little. And first of all, I took some time off. But other than taking some time off, I landed on this incredible opportunity with Deloitte, where it was about building a market in Quebec and growing a market in Quebec. But at the same time, it had this amazing national model, and it really harnessed the technical expertise as an engineer, but then went into the portfolio level. So where I wasn't just telling one building owner or one client at a time what to do with one building. I would go into banks, I would go into supermarket companies, airline companies, telecom companies, and telling them, hey, you have a very diverse portfolio of assets that includes buildings, but it includes a whole bunch of other things as well. And here's how you can decarbonize. And you shouldn't just be decarbonizing your operations, you should be decarbonizing your supply chain. So that led me to and thankfully, yes, I joined Deloitte as a senior manager, but humbly, I have so much to learn because of the interdisciplinary nature within Deloitte. And you come in, you meet an economist next to you, and he starts challenging some of the things that you're suggesting, or you meet a behavioral scientist or someone who works with communications and marketing and tells you can't say things the way you were used to say them. So the human element really shone for me when I transitioned careers, but at the same time, it was such a nice challenge to join nationally it was a big team, and locally a team that I can grow with amazing people left in it.
Thank you. Actually, one of our Efficiency Canada, one of our colleagues said, just up here, I wanted to quote her. I think I missed it right here, Shireen. But she said, we can't juggle all at the same time, but we can pace it out. And I think, Afaf, you give us a great lesson there, that if something's not working, that there was a voice inside of you that said, I don't want to be the Wonder Woman right now, or whatever this perception of this Wonder Superwoman thing that I'm doing right now is not making me happy. And so really urging people to take that break, to take that space, to take those wellness days where possible, so that you can recalibrate as a human being, right? And what that did for you is it gave you the imagination and the space to figure out, okay, my next move might not be necessarily in energy modeling in this particular way on this but it led you to where you are at now, which is Senior Sustainability and Climate Manager at Deloitte. And so you're working with some of Canada's top, most high-profile corporations. And so when you say there's many people in the room that are, because what essentially you're doing is you're decarbonizing their company, but also their assets, their fleets. These are not, you're not just talking about the built environment anymore. This is far expanded beyond that. And can you speak to a little bit about that and what those conversations look like in helping folks decarbonize their portfolios?
Absolutely. I think typically how we start would be to talk to some of the various departments, like business departments that own different types of these assets. And so you have someone from fleet, someone from, I don't know, the built environment, someone from the supplier side, the procurement, right? And so what you would do is help build a greenhouse gas emission inventory, which sets the baseline for the client to actually know how much they're emitting in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And then what you would do next is start workshopping together to understand their vision, like how much would you want to reduce and by what time, what are your financial means, what are the ongoing efforts already, because you don't have to invent things from scratch. Sometimes there are ongoing efforts either way that are going to help towards decarbonizing. And then what you do next is you start setting targets again together. And a lot of what we do we never say we work for the client, we work with the client, because it's at the end of the day, we're going to be gone and they're going to need to decarbonize themselves. So we do the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. We talk about their material emissions, and we start setting a plan, an action plan, and a roadmap. And we start quantifying those. So we say, oh, do you want to align yourself with the SBTI, the Science Based Target Initiative, or some other form of framework? And then we start saying this is the gap. And so over a period of time, you need to hit, let's say, 50% of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, which is a huge undertaking already. And by 2015, you want to be net zero, or by 2040, you want to be net zero. So I would say that you quantify them, you start talking to the different departments of what they're doing, and then you start proposing new measures, and you start quantifying their consequential, almost like a waterfall diagram, consequential impact, and how much these would cost. And then the client has this like full futuristic picture, and it's a journey. It's not like a one set, hey, like we come in and we leave, but they have a really good understanding of how much they need to emit and who owns what emissions and what sub-targets they need to have, etc.
Okay, we're going to take a question. Afaf, thanks for answering that. We are taking a question now from one of the participants, Juhi from London, UK. And she says, Happy International Women's Day to everyone. She says, would you be able to offer a concise summary of the building codes, energy codes, and any relevant guidelines regarding sustainability consultancy and energy modeling for individuals making the transition to the Canadian market, enabling them to prepare effectively and succeed in their pursuits?
Love it. Here, do a literature review in a minute. I will do it. Okay. Feel free to reach out after. Obviously, the National Energy Code for buildings is super important. And that, I think the 2025 version is coming up soon, but I could be wrong. I know the 2020 version is out now. And within different provinces, they actually have tiered codes now. And the 2020 version does show some tiers as well. And so every single province will show you slightly different levels of energy efficiency. And now they've introduced greenhouse gas emissions as well. And most of the codes, unfortunately, still talk about new construction and major renovation. So a lot of the people, the 89% existing building stock, could get away with one-on-one retrofits. Not anymore, though. A lot of the federal government has recently announced mandatory building performance standards, and these are going to be slowly but surely adopted in the next few years. And these will require buildings of certain size to report on their environmental data, with the aim to eventually decarbonize. On the portfolio level, though, so energy modeling, though, like you have, oh my God, you have ASHRAE 189, you have the NECB 2020, you have, oh my God, ASHRAE 55, you have 62.1 for natural ventilation, and there's so many more. On the portfolio level side, you have the SBTI, you have TCFD, and then you can look into things like GRI and SASB, which are closely now aligned with the ISSB. I said a lot of acronyms, but feel free to reach out after.
Absolutely. You can check out Afaf's TED Talk later. I'm just putting it out there, Afaf. I feel like the next one, is it really that far away? About it? Okay. I want to ask you a little bit about climate mitigation. There's a question from one of our participants asking about the climate mitigation advisory services that deal with developing decarbonization and energy transition services. Can you speak a little bit more about that at your work at Deloitte?
I think, how I was explaining, like just in the interest of time, like how I was explaining the baseline, the target setting, yes. The marginal abatement cost curves of what it costs to reduce one ton of carbon equivalent versus how much it costs. I would say this is really the heart of it when it comes to climate mitigation. Adaptation is a different question. ESG is a different question. But I think that really summarizes it nicely in terms of service offering.
Thank you for that. There's another thing here. If you could just define, it was an earlier question, define the difference between a deep energy retrofit versus a regular energy upgrade to a home.
And a regular energy upgrade to a home could be probably driven by an ASHRAE audit. Some utilities come in for free to your house. I've had someone do that recently to our house from Hydro-Quebec, and they give you like energy savings that are what we call low-hanging fruit, low cost, no cost measures. And these could be like change your pumps to variable speed drives, or maybe change your furnace to a higher functioning furnace. And then ASHRAE level 1 or 2 are not as deep. It's like a quick walk through of the visit. ASHRAE level 2 starts looking into the efficiency and sometimes the age of the equipment as well. But an ASHRAE level 3 is the difference. And like a deep energy retrofit requires at least 50% energy savings and a good like 80% greenhouse gas emission savings. So it will focus on things like envelope and very expensive things as well. When combined, they make a really good business case. Whereas a regular energy upgrade would be looking at almost, I would say, not a like-for-like replacement, but looking at what's the oldest piece of equipment you have, and then upgrading that potentially to a higher performing one, not necessarily fuel switching. There's a logic in the deep energy retrofit process that you have to demand reduce first, so that, let's say, if you retrofit the envelope and the windows that are leaking first, then you can have a smaller sized heat pump that can work amazingly, and it's electric and might be solar powered or whatnot. It's also more intrusive and more costly, but there is a business case.
Awesome. Okay. I think I got a few of the questions off right now, but we still have a question and period time that we'll go to. So please, at that part, you can also participate and ask your questions. Afaf, I just want to ask you before we leave, what are the most critical changes that we must take to face the future effectively in terms of providing solutions to Canadian corporations for decarbonization? Because when we think about the average business owner, if we look at the average small to medium-sized business, many Canadians, and speaking about multitasking as well, as a mother, I have a sick baby with me today. So there's a lot happening right now, but happy International Women's Day with that said. But going back to that, many people they can't even comprehend staying alive in this economy, let alone decarbonizing themselves. Yet we see a trend, obviously, of some of the most successful Canadian corporations that are doing this, have already started to do this, and are currently in the midst of doing this, because we're ready for this 2030, 2040 pivot, where Canadian business, we'll see Canadian businesses have to shift to adhering to our SDG goals. And so I think it's hard for the average person to understand, or the average business owner to understand, why would they invest in a greener portfolio, or why invest now to have your business come in at double, right, what it is claimed at today or what it's seen as today. So that's hard for a lot of people. So what are ways, or what are the critical changes that corporations or corporate Canada is taking currently to meet our SDGs, and what do we need to do more in terms of business to reach that level?
So maybe I'll talk about the drivers very quickly before what they need to do. The drivers, like regulatory is the most obvious one, although funny enough, a lot of it wasn't driven by regulation first. It was very much investor driven. So investors started looking at where do they place their money, and how do they distinguish, like how can they make money faster, in a nutshell, and put their money where there's purpose. So that's how it started, and it started in the 90s. So it's not a new concept. And then I think people are still, or they have been criticized a lot for greenwashing. So they're like, oh my God, my brand reputation is at stake. So brand reputation is another one. So investor pressure, brand reputation is another one. Being competitive across different competitors and showing that there's a distinction between what you do. Employee retention, like people don't want to work for quote unquote evil companies, and they want to continue to work for companies that have purpose. Customers want to deal with people that have, yes, occasionally the cheapest solutions, but also what comes with that as a value. So I think, what can corporations do? I think they can start talking. I think stakeholder engagement is the first process. And a lot of them have already committed, and they said, we're going to do great things. And then they're like, whoops, how do we do it? And I think the economy is moving that way. The economy is going to need to scale faster, but it is moving in that direction. And you'll see a lot of people having fleet electrification strategies, or when they talk about the food that they want to have in their supermarkets. They want to make sure that it's refrigerated in a more energy efficient cooler that is driving halfway across the country because it costs more money. Or I would say, and within the built environment, just because that's the focus, I would say health and being. Like COVID, I think, is one keyword for a lot of people. And if you're not doing it for the sake of energy efficiency or GHG emissions, you have to do it for the sake of health and being, because oftentimes the buildings that aren't super comfortable are also a little bit energy efficient, not energy inefficient, and they're not designed correctly. And so I could be sitting by like a leaky wall behind me and feeling very cold. So as a human being, I'm not actually producing work properly. So if we start talking about these human impacts of the technologies that we want to adopt to decarbonize or to find energy efficiency, we'll find a business case, because people at the end of the day, they are the highest, you're spending the highest amount of money on salaries. And so if people aren't happy, then you don't have a business.
Wow. I just want to say this last remark before Alison take it away, but Afaf, you said this at our Deconstruct panel last Energy Efficiency Day, that you are passionate of turning any non-believer of energy efficiency into a believer. And clearly you have just presented an amazing case right there. Thank you so much for that. That was awesome. Alison, take it away.
Thanks. I hate to interrupt such a great conversation. I feel like we could probably talk for another hour and it would just be amazing. So there is one question that I just wanted to post from the audience. And then Natasha, I've actually got a question for you too. Afaf, this is for you. From your perspective on what skills need to be developed to move from a purely technical background in energy efficiency to specialized leadership in decarbonization and ESG, what would those skills be?
Great question. Skills, having done enough technical so you can generalize or move from the detail to the general, because when you do so much energy modeling in various parts of the world for various types of buildings, for different code compliance or net zero purposes, you start seeing a pattern and you're like, do I need to sit down and do this highly detailed energy model for every single time? So I'd say being able to generalize your recommendations, being able to talk to people. So presentation skills are really important, and listening and being curious. Oh my God, there's so much content just on LinkedIn. There's so much happening in the world that is actually very hard to keep up. And so reading up on things like the SBTI, the GRI, the ISSB, the IFRS, reading up on what double materiality is, what the latest SEC disclosure requirements are saying. And so just reading a little bit and then asking for opportunities, I think, on just reading company ESG reports and their impact reports, or a task force on climate related financial disclosure report. That'd be great.
That is a fabulous answer. Thank you. And that was an excellent question. So I just want to wrap up the sort of interview portion of this. And Natasha, in a second, I'm going to ask you to talk about the Trailblazers program. I can use my words to describe how I'm feeling right now, but I'll just go from the chat because we have such incredible accolades in the chat. Somebody's saying, thank you for talking about motherhood and burnout. It's just such an important topic for women, burnout for everybody, but motherhood and how that contributes, especially. Comments about it being very inspiring. Thank you so much for being here. Natasha, you're a fabulous moderator. Comments there. And just thank you for coming forward and being willing to talk about these topics, because sometimes they're a little hard to talk about. With that, Natasha, we just have this incredible group of trailblazers that you work with. Afaf is just one incredible example of the people that you get to work with on a daily basis. So can you just talk a little bit about the Trailblazers program and how people can get connected with these amazing people working in the energy efficiency industry?
Absolutely. Thank you, Alison, for asking that question. I saw one other question in the chat that asked that somebody said that they're a newcomer to the country and how do they get connected and how can they get a career in this field? And so I'm going to try and combine both of those things together right now. The Energy Trailblazers is an amazing group of people who are just that. They're trailblazers from diverse communities who are paving the way in energy efficiency across Canada. So they're the architects, they're the engineers, they're the folks who do the solar panels, they're the folks that do the lighting. Like every part of the design to build model we have in our microcosm space of the Energy Trailblazers. And not only are they inspiring, they have careers that you might have never heard of before or that you don't even know exists. And what's really cool is that it's connected to something called the Career Hub. So for all of you who are looking for a career in energy efficiency, or saying, hey, I'm mid-career someone else and I want to make a switch, or I want to find a more meaningful career, go onto our Career Hub. I'm sure Hannah's probably going to pop it in the chat right now. Check out our Career Hub, because that's where you're going to meet all of the energy trailblazers like Afaf. You're going to read their career stories. You're going to see how they got to this journey. You can also join us on Instagram, LinkedIn. Right now, Instagram is more workforce related, so you'll see all of our Trailblazers profiles on there. So please join Efficiency Canada's IG. And our Career Hub is really cool because we have a job board. So right after you're inspired by Afaf's career, you can go on the job board and see what's available in the market for something that's aligned with Afaf's career. So it's a one-stop shop. It's super cool. Check it out. And for the person who asks how you get into the sector, please watch this again and take some notes of what Afaf has said. And it's like going out, networking, joining these kind of events, staying in the know, and having conversations. I cannot highlight enough. Soft skills, people. It's soft skills. That's what gets you in the door. That's what gets you through the interview.
Yeah. I can't echo that enough. So we're going to unfortunately close now. Like I said, I was just go on and on. I'm just going to start again by wishing everybody a happy International Women's Day. Please take the time to build up the women in your community. There is a special set of barriers that women and marginalized people face, and you can take small steps to start to recognize that and to work towards equitability. So with that, this was recorded. We got that question a lot. This was recorded. So we have a YouTube channel. It will be on the YouTube channel. I intend to go back and watch this again just to feel inspired because it was incredible. I'd also like to share an action that I would be happy to put forward on this International Women's Day. If there is any interest in just hosting a women's group to share skills and abilities and to share knowledge on those, I think that would be a really incredible way to convene. So if anybody's interested in that, let Natasha or I know. We can set something up. This is what we do at Efficiency Canada. We build each other up and we build up the energy efficiency industry. With that, thank you so much, ladies. This was just amazing. We really appreciate your time and your very considered responses and the information you shared today. So next session is in 2 weeks. That one's a little bit more technical. It's about virtual home energy assessments. We will be having Efficiency One and Climate on. They partnered on remote home energy assessments. So they're going to share the results of that pilot. And I think it's going to be a really interesting and spicy session. So please join us then. And again, thank you to everyone who attended today. Reach out. We love to hear from you. Take care. Happy Friday. Bye-bye.